So before we get started, I just wanted to briefly introduce myself. My name is Sabrina Ziegler, and I'm AMSA Settlement Coordinator, and I will be guiding us through today's session. I would like to welcome our two speakers today, Adrian Carter from the Vancouver Island Counseling Center for Immigrant and Refugees Association, CCIR, and Mariana Martinez Vieira from Vancouver Association for Survivors of Torture, VAST. So our agenda for today is we're going to have two presentations, and after each presentation, we'll have a short Q&A session. And then after that Q&A session, we'll have some time for some short group discussions to really discuss the information that was presented today and to really look at what were some of the key insights and some of the key nuggets that we can take back for our own work that we do. So I would like to introduce our first speaker, Adrian Carter. And Adrian Carter is with the Vancouver Island Counseling Center for Immigrants and Refugee Association. Adrian is a psychotherapist who's worked in the field of mental health for the past 30 years. She has obtained her master's degree in social work from McGill University in Montreal. She has recently returned from Jordan, where she worked for 2.5 years with the Center for Victims of Torture as a psychotherapist and trainer. Her job was to supervise and train local therapists who work to provide therapy to Syrian and Iraqi refugees. At present, Adrian has been the founder and one of the directors to set up the Vancouver Island Counseling Center for Immigrants and Refugees. The center works with recent as well as former refugees and immigrants, both in Victoria and in the Cowichan Valley, who have been traumatized in their home countries. So I'd like to welcome Adrian for her presentation.
Good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me to this session. And I am actually quite passionate about the Counseling Center for Immigrants and Refugees. So I wanted to introduce the center to you and tell you a little bit about the kind of work that we are doing. We are a very young organization. The idea for this counseling center started in 2015, after I returned from Jordan, actually to retire, but there was a lot of work to do. Having worked in the area of mental health even for Canadians is very sparsely provided, especially for adults. And for children, there are long wait lists. So I knew from having participated in the Society for Survivors of Torture that at that time there were about 3,000 people who have come from various countries who have experienced trauma and torture, but were never able to receive any kind of mental health assistance. So the original idea, before we knew that a large number of Syrian refugees would be coming to Canada, was actually to serve past refugees and immigrants. So for that reason, we set up this center. Okay. As most of you, probably all of you already know, that the people that we are serving now have come from very, very difficult conditions. The majority seems to be Syrian, but we're also getting a lot of Iraqi refugees and people from Sudan and from a variety of countries, Iran, and other countries who have recently came into Canada. So you can see the origins of what especially children, but also so many adults had to go through while they were in Syria. And then they arriving to Canada and be greeted by the Prime Minister. And there's a lot of welcoming offered to the refugees who are coming. The settlement organizations are beautifully organized to provide housing, language, job creation. But one of the things that the country seemed to have forgotten about is providing mental health services. And often the need for these services doesn't come generally in the first year, because most of the important areas are settling down, getting used to the new country, learning English. But it does come because the trauma that people have experienced doesn't just disappear by itself. So Syria has changed a great deal. Having worked in Jordan for about 2.5 years, we saw how people were coming across the country, going from place to place. They have been displaced within Syria many times. And the stories we heard, especially from the children, were absolutely horrifying. No child ever should have to go through some of the experiences that they have gone through. So you could see some of the changes in the Syria of 2011 versus the Syria of 2015. The displacement, the number of deaths, the terror was very severe in that country. And these were the stories that we heard in Jordan. You are very familiar with some of these pictures, especially of this little boy that really caught the heart of so many Canadians. Now, when you look at this child is so traumatized. He has been pulled from the rubble. And yes, he's alive, but what happens to his mental health, to his state of mental health? So when this child or children like this come to Canada, they do need mental health assistance. We have had several children referred now to our center who have been so traumatized. They have been kidnapped. Many of the teenagers have been tortured. And having seen their family members often being killed in front of them, they might repress this story for a while in order to help them settle in the new country. But these stories, they live in the body, they live in the mind, and eventually they have to be dealt with. So that's the reason why we set up our counseling center. You could see the people, even this horrifying trip to get into Jordan was terrible. They have been faced with a lot of Syrian guards. They have been shot at. And then sometimes the Jordanian border was closed, so they were right outside the border but couldn't get in for several days. And then those of you who know Jordan have gone to Zaatari camp, which at the beginning was a pretty tough camp to be in. So these are some of the reasons why our counseling center was set up. And our first clients were actually immigrants who had been here for quite a long time, but they never got the help that they needed. They came from South America, they came from China, they came from Nepal, they came from Iran. So now that we had a center, people are beginning to realize that there is help available. Many of them are not speaking the language, so we needed a team of translators also. And we had no money at all, and we still don't have any money after 1.5 years. So we have recruited clinicians who are all registered master's level, some are PhD level clinicians who have other jobs, but they're giving their time pro bono to work for our center. And this is just one of the pictures where you can get a sense about some of our clinicians. This group is a composite of our Victoria and Duncan Cowichan Valley group. So many of our counselors are also retired. Some of them are teaching at the university. Some of them are working in other areas. And they are able to take maybe 1 or 2 clients at a time with our counseling center. What we are offering is support, supervision, support. We have set up regular supervision for all of the counselors and actually for all of the translators. One of the things we found that it's very difficult to work with refugee families when you're all alone doing it. The stories are horrifying. And if you cannot debrief some of the stories that you're hearing, it will affect you. And little later on, we're going to talk a bit about vicarious trauma and how it affects settlement workers, how it affects counselors, and how it affects translators. So the kind of services we are offering is individual counseling, family counseling, youth counseling, child counseling, support groups, and therapy groups. Each family who comes to our organization has a screening interview, and often that's 2 interviews to start getting to know the client. And then it's decided what kind of therapy would be most suitable for this person or for this family. And then we look at which one of our counselors are best equipped to work with that particular family. Now, our counselors come from very varied backgrounds. We have people who are talking therapists, some are doing EMDR, some are somatic therapists, some are expressive therapists, play therapists who are working specifically with children. So we have quite a choice as to who to assign each client or each family. Usually people come in families. So when children are referred to us, we find that their parents are also traumatized and barely coping, but we got to wait until the parent is ready for the counseling. The support groups are very light groups where they discuss about present issues that they are facing. How are they doing with it? This would be settlement, language difficulties, housing, but we also discuss domestic violence, parental discipline, what's acceptable in this country, what's not acceptable. The therapy groups is different. We take the pattern of the therapy groups from what the Center for Victims of Torture was doing in Jordan, where we had thousands, literally thousands of Syrian and Iraqi refugees coming to our center to try and find some relief from the very painful feelings they were experiencing. So the therapy groups were based on a 3-pronged approach, creating safety, first of all. It was all 10 sessions, co-led by 2 clinicians, and we also had a translator. The translator was for us back in Jordan, who were supervising the group, because all of the clinicians, of course, did the therapy in Arabic. And during the middle stage, they have worked through a lot of the trauma that they have experienced. And then the 3rd stage was the future, climbing out of the trauma and looking at what the future is going to bring. And it was amazing to see, because the difference between the people's ability to function between the 1st session and the 10th session was completely different. People have been able to work through most of their traumas within the 10 sessions. Now, sometimes in addition to that, we also offered individual therapy. So for example, if a person was feeling suicidal or really just kind of coming apart, they could not participate in the group. So they were offered then individual session. This is a group of translators, and we have maybe about 10 translators speaking different languages, so we can find a translator to fit any language that comes to our office. More pictures about our clinicians. We also offer family, couple, and individual counseling. Youth counseling is very important. Several of the teenagers who have been referred to us are very distressed. Many of them see no hope for the future. Many of them are suicidal. So these are the young people that we're serving. And a lot of children also that are now beginning to come to us with unimaginably horrendous stories. And we are located in a church, St. Peter's Church, which for now suits our needs, although we are growing out of the clinical space in the church. Now, here is our contact and our website. I urge you to look at our relatively new website, which has just been prepared. And also, if there are any counselors in the Victoria area or in the Cowichan Valley, we would love to be able to expand our team. I was also asked to talk a little bit about vicarious traumatization, which is really an important topic. We work with clients, but we also work with the support staff. So a lot of settlement workers who are exposed to the everyday trauma of their clients find that they have a lot of symptoms of burning out, and they are seeking help. So we have provided some training on how to cope with the symptoms of burnout. We have also provided some individual therapy to these settlement workers, and they may come from the Victoria area, they may come from Duncan, but also we are finding that the sponsorship groups are needing some assistance. Often members of the sponsorship groups are experiencing signs and symptoms of burnout, and they are coming to consult about the best way that they can assist the refugee families without themselves burning out. So you know what vicarious trauma means. It's when you're hearing too many stories and you're a very empathic person, it does affect you. And you're engaged with the client's stories so strongly that you're beginning to feel it. And this has actually affected our translators as well as our clinicians. We had 2 translators who became physically ill after translating for a particular family, and they didn't know what the problem was, and they felt that they themselves were not good enough for the job. But that wasn't it. One of the things we found is that having groups and regular supervision for everyone who works with traumatized clients can go a long way to assist them. So 1 or 2 sessions with the sick translators have been able, they could debrief what they were experiencing and why they were feeling those symptoms. And many of the settlement workers themselves may have some trauma that hasn't been worked through, and having contact with new refugee family stories have triggered their trauma. So that's where some help is very important. So when people are disrupted by the traumatic stories, it can destroy their whole sense of balance, their connections, their identity, the meanings that they find in life. And this has shown very often with counselors and translators all over the world where I had a chance to work with people who work with trauma. So one of the most important areas to look at here is a two-tiered model of supervision and support, which means they get supervision in their everyday work from the organizations that they're working for, but they also need to be able to debrief the stories that they're hearing. And that area is often missing, especially with counselors in other smaller towns who are working on their own. They don't have any peers or supervisors to debrief these stories, so they internalize it. So it is not unusual when people feel that they're getting sick and getting burnt out. It's generally all of us are affected by the horrendous story that we're hearing. But if there could be created support groups for these settlement workers or for the clinicians, and that's something that we are able right now to provide for people who are working, providing therapy for refugee families. And it is a professional behavior to acknowledge these feelings and try to deal with it. Because if we don't acknowledge the feelings, it's going to get worse. It's not going to get any better. And if we don't acknowledge the people, we also cannot continue to provide professional services. So what you'll see in some people, the clinicians or settlement workers or translators, is that they close themselves off and they don't want to hear the stories. And that's a sign that you are approaching burnout, so something really needs to be done about it. Or some people become extremely compassionate and lose the boundaries. And boundaries are so important in this work. You cannot be both clinician and a friend to a particular family. The family does need friends, but the clinical professionalism must be respected. Otherwise, it's going to become too much to handle it. Okay, I don't know how many minutes it took, but...
We're still good. We still have a couple minutes time. So thank you so much, Adrian, and thank you for sharing that. And also just really thinking about, my note that I took down was really thinking about boundaries, and it's a conversation that's very linked to vicarious trauma. And AMSA recently did a webinar on the topic of ethical boundaries, and that's a great resource for you and your staff, and it can be found on the AMSA website. So I think we have a couple minutes to take some questions. So is there any questions that are on and Tracy will be going around with the microphone.
I don't know if you've explored the possibility of online counseling, because I'm from up north, and we can't get people to counsel, but we have explored some online counseling, whether for your staff or for your clients.
Well, we are actually doing some online support of counselors, because you're absolutely right. If you're from a small town, let's say northern Vancouver Island or anywhere else, from Kitimat, yes, there are very few counseling resources. There are very few mental health counseling resources even in Victoria. I think Vancouver is richer, but So we are providing online counseling support for clinicians, but we haven't done it to clients very much because it's very difficult. Like when the client is in the same room as you are and the translator is also sitting there, you can observe the client in all its complexity. When they are 1,000 kilometers away, and let's say they get really upset at what's happening, which is very normal when you're trying to cope with your difficult stories, there's nobody there. Like sometimes just a touch on the shoulder can really reground the client. So we've been very hesitant to do online counseling, but we can do online support.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your information. It is so important to arouse the awareness of a settlement practitioner. They might be the second victims in this case. And as a supervisor, I want to know, when you mentioned about we might be able to give some support group for our settlement practitioners, but I'd like to know the frequency, what is the more appropriate, like once a week or maybe even daily, or by each case, that would be more efficient. And it's new for me. I want to start to set up this system here. Can I get some advice from you? Thank you.
Well, for our counseling center, we are there for our counselors whenever they need to debrief. So if it's a very difficult client, we can be there even after each time they see the client. They generally don't need that much, but we have set up regular monthly supervision sessions for all the counselors that are carrying clients, and separately for all the translators that are working with clients. So it really depends on who you are working with. Settlement workers, for example, could also benefit from regular weekly supervision if possible. In Jordan, for example, where they have seen hundreds and thousands of clients, it was regular weekly group supervision, but we were also there for weekly individual supervision. So it's amazing how much time we put into supervision and support in order to upkeep the energy and the ability of the counselors to continue working with the clients. Like the therapy groups are very heavy. I mean, you hear all kinds of stories, and often the younger counselors back in Jordan would leave the group at the end, go into a corner and just cry. So somebody needs to be there just to see, are you okay? What can we do to help you? Because imagine 10 people sharing their horror stories. And it's very hard on the translators, and we often forget about the translators. But they take it in twice because they hear it from the client, and then they translate it to the clinician, then they hear the response from the clinician. So they're working all the time during a session. So, and they're not trained clinicians, so they really need the ability to be able to process what they're feeling. We had an Arabic-speaking translator where she happened to come from the same area, but she has been here for 15 years or so and is a university professor. And she could not believe how much she was affected by the story of a particular female client. And until she was able to debrief and talk about it, she became almost dysfunctional, very, very ill. She thought she was suffering from food poisoning. So it really helped us to understand that we cannot forget any member of the group who are working with trauma stories.
Yeah, we have time for one more question.
Okay, so I'm not sure if it's a question, but it's more like a comment or our experience. So I think one thing which happened with the Syrian families was that this has not been a linear process where you've been able to put in best practice into everything. I'm talking about the vicarious piece for settlement workers. So it's sort of like, as you're going through the process, you're realizing there are brand new people who are doing this work and
Yes.
also being overwhelmed by the work that they're doing. The clients are not just talking about mental health stories, there's actual physical needs right away which need to be
Yes.
dealt with. So staff got torn between, okay, there is this whole mental health issue of the client, my own issue, but also there are these physical needs which need to be met, like there's health appointments, so people got caught up in all of that urgency of what needed to be
Yes.
done in the moment. So time was it continues to be actually the biggest thing. If we are putting people through support groups, we try and provide through EAP and all, whatever support we can. But time is always an issue, even when they're in those sessions. They'll say, well, my clients need me because they are hooked too, in terms of like dependency and things like that. So it's been a challenge because it wasn't a process where we started with, oh, this is how it's gonna pan out. Like we are trying to
Yes.
address things midway and as emergent issues as well. So that's been one of the biggest challenges from my perspective.
You are so right, because that's the settlement workers struggled with all of those areas, the present issue of housing and language and jobs, and the mental health issues. They didn't want to handle the mental health issues, but it was seeping through because people were anxious to talk about their experiences. So I found in this way, nothing is as usual. We're learning as we're going along, and we're learning how much settlement workers and others need the ongoing support, but who is providing the support? Work is going on at such a rapid pace to try and deal with all the problems that to be able to sit down and debrief and process seems like a luxury, but it isn't. It's a necessity.
Thank you so much, Adrian. Thank you so much. So I'd like to introduce our second speaker, Mariana Martinez Vieira from the Vancouver Association for Survivors of Torture, VAST. Mariana is a registered clinical counselor with over 25 years of experience working with survivors of political violence and torture, both in Canada and in Latin America. She has been with the Vancouver Association for Survivors of Torture, better known as VAST, for the last 13 years as a clinical counselor, group therapy program coordinator, and clinical supervisor. In December of 2015, when the province of British Columbia launched the Refugee Readiness Project, Mariana was appointed BC's Provincial Refugee Mental Health Coordinator. And Mariana is going to be talking about group therapy programs for refugee clients. So welcome.
Thanks for the intro. Great to be here and to see so many familiar faces and new ones as well. So based on that, and in order to acknowledge the knowledge in the room and the experience in the room, I will jump right into it. I've also been very aware of the time. The Vancouver Association for Survivors of Torture, I will speak about a specific component of our program. Let us have an idea of the plan for the day. So, a couple of words about VAST, who we are, what we do. I'll talk about our model, community-based trauma-informed practice, underlying everything that we do. I will focus on the phase model approach to refugee trauma healing that borrows from Judith Herman's Stages of Recovery, and more specifically about a model for group-based mental health for refugees meant to help clients rebuild community. When we talk about groups, we cannot exclude the topic of assessing for group readiness, and about that I will bring up the best vulnerability assessment tool. And I will focus specifically on a trauma-informed group program for refugees recently developed as a result of decades of VAST doing groups for refugees and we call it the landing and settling. And to recap, I will share with you some lessons learned, and I bet those will resonate with you, and some things that clients say about the experience of being with us in groups, trauma-informed groups. So let's jump right into it. And call it my own attachment to this picture. There are new ones. I want to acknowledge the ISS folks. They provided new pictures to me, but I seem to be very attached to this one. We've been at this great building, the ISS Center, Welcome Center for Refugees, for almost a year now. But we are still opening. And that's where VAS is located these days. And VAS has been around for much longer, for the last 30 years. It started as a grassroots organization established in 1986 to promote the human rights and mental health of refugees arriving in the region with psychological trauma as a result of political violence, torture, persecution of other forms, persecution based on race, religion, nationality, gender identity, sexual orientation, and political opinion. And here we are after all these years. So what we do is community-based work. How not to do community-based work, right? When we are trying to support clients heal from torture and violence, and that's what these experiences ripped off our clients off, community. And our work is trauma-informed, how not to do trauma-informed work. The principles of trauma-informed practice inform everything we do. Collaboration, choice, client's choice, safety, trustworthiness, empowerment. We do believe that healing happens in community, and in order to work and for the work to be effective, we need to integrate services. Oftentimes we put it this way, the settlement work that many of you guys do cannot happen in the vacuum, right? It needs to be trauma-informed. And the trauma healing work, call it counseling, whether it's individual or in groups, cannot happen in a vacuum either. It needs to be settlement-informed. So we really advocate for that integration of services. Because it helps us with prompt referral and follow-up. That flow of delivery of services happens. And because that integration of services and working in community, being trauma-informed, makes us sustainable in the work. And building from what Adrian was sharing with us about vicarious trauma, right, and the whole concept of self-care, the best, or one of the best principles of self-care is building that network of exchange, solidarity, and a mutual witnessing among workers. That's what really constitutes the best, most solid form of self-care. So I mentioned Judy Herman's model, three-phase model of trauma treatment, developed by Herman in his seminal work, Trauma and Recovery. The stages of recovery, as described by Herman's, are safety and stabilization, stage 1, remembrance and mourning, and reconnection. And let us see how these 3 stages of recovery that are not at all linear, right? So it's like this cycle and this continuum, what they look like when it comes to our work with refugees. When we speak about safety and stabilization, stage 1, trauma work, that's when the concept of being trauma-informed really comes to mind. We, no matter whether we are counselors, settlement workers, link instructors, job search counselors, we are all working together to create a safe and a stable life in the here and now for refugees. Helping them be here versus going there into the story, into the memory, so that they eventually get to a point where they can remember versus relieve the trauma. And so they can really be here in Canada and enjoy this second chance. And in this first safety and stabilization phase, which is, I would say, an ongoing one, think about a non-linear model, we need to focus on resettlement goals, And this is such an obvious statement, but I do believe in stating the obvious, right? So primary needs first. Stage 2, remembrance and mourning. That's where things get more trauma-focused, trauma-specific. Advanced, we do this piece of the work individually. And it's about trauma memory processing. Yeah, getting into the story. There's grief there. There's lots of work that we don't always get to do with all clients, but it's more trauma specific. Very important for us to bear in mind. We are all working with clients in the aftermath of trauma, so we all need to be trauma informed, but do we need to be trauma specific? Not necessarily, not even counselors, right? And when it comes to healing, going into the story is not only needed, but oftentimes, and I dare say most of the times, it's not even recommended, especially in the first stages of recovery. So, leaving the stage 2 trauma-focused piece aside, moving on to stage 3, reconnection. And that's where the word community comes to mind again, doesn't it? So it's about helping clients with rewriting their narrative, adopting new facets of identity. We call it personality integration as well, meaning making, building or rebuilding relationships that are trusting and safe, building community. So if you think about stage 1 and stage 3 as being the most clearly trauma-informed and the ones that we all work on, that leads us to groups. So in order to help our clients rebuild community in Canada, we do groups. Many of us, not only Advanced. I'm very aware, I'm very glad to know that many community partners are doing this. And we do a model for group-based mental health for refugees. We do it to build capacity, to make the most of the very limited resources that we have, and this is part of the reality, to make effective use of the resources, the best and most effective use of them. We believe in groups because we live in attachment, don't we? And we are mammals. We are bound to belong and to attach. And because they are potentially more cross-cultural effective. And groups help us integrate settlement and mental health services and do the work from a very strengths-based, normalizing, non-pathologizing framework. And that's very important. That's all about being trauma-informed. And therefore, groups allow us to reduce the stigma. So, in trauma-informed groups for refugees, so let us be very clear, these are not groups where we go to the stories. Not that we don't believe in those groups, but in stage 1 trauma work, and for a long time, I would say, we do groups that are trauma-informed. And we provide safety and containment. Remember, helping clients be here and not go there. Be aware when they remember and don't get lost in the memory. We explore resources through somatic interventions, neurobiology-based interventions. If anyone in the room gets curious about the modalities we use, come talk to me after. I don't want to become too clinical here. We help clients build coping skills, resources, internal, external, to be here. We practice those skills. We provide psychoeducation because we believe that knowledge about how my nervous system works, the impact of trauma, and how normal, natural, appropriate this is key. Information is power. So people need to understand. And that's a very important piece of groups. It allows, that container of a group allows individuals to establish trust in relationships, and it allows us, the workers, to have an ongoing opportunity for assessment, right? And then based on that assessment, we can, again, have timely referral and advocacy for our clients. So when it comes to groups and inviting clients to groups, and I say inviting rather than registering clients for groups, it's important to consider the whole question of group readiness, right? No, that client I worry about. So for the clinicians in the room, we might have the concept of the window of tolerance and whether a client is there or not, right? And when he's not, how soon he can come back. We can have that at the back of our minds. But all in all, for all of us, a very important tool to assess group readiness would be a tool such as the BAS vulnerability assessment tool. So this tool that can be available to all of you if it hasn't been yet, we developed, thanks to the funding of the Refugee Readiness Project and the province of British Columbia, and it's a 3-part assessment tool. The first one is a settlement checklist. So we don't claim to have reinvented the wheel here, don't get me wrong. We basically summarize questions that we all have at the back of our minds when we meet clients, and questions that we make. But they are listed, very straightforward questions. Do you have a doctor? Are you in contact with community group for parenting support? So you can have a look at those 10 questions that will help you map the situation and will help you assess this individual in terms of vulnerability and settlement vulnerability. The second portion is the PROTECT questionnaire developed in Scandinavia, adapted for use in British Columbia. That's what we did at VAST. And the 10 questions are, again, very straightforward. Do you have nightmares? Do you have problems falling asleep? Do you notice loss of interest in things? So these are questions derived from the DSM-5 PTSD, diagnostic criteria, to assess the mental health vulnerability of this individual. And last but not least, and thinking about being trauma-informed, we need to acknowledge that this individual comes with resources and very, very unique patterns of resiliency and inner strength. So we explore that with open-ended questions, internal, external resources. What helped you be here today? What has sustained you in your struggles? Different ways to frame that conversation, and a very key element of this assessment for vulnerability. This to assess group readiness. Keep it in mind, email us if you want to have a copy, electronic copy of the assessment tool. So once we decide that the client is group ready, and once we have a group set in place, let us see what it looks like. Because my purpose for today is for you to leave the room with a picture, with an internalized felt sense of what this might look like, and how you might, if you haven't yet, bring this to your agency. We at VAS are very happy to see that these suggestions have been landing, and also because of the knowledge and expertise and other community partners, we've been sharing wonderful experiences with these groups. I, as Provincial Refugee Mental Health Coordinator, have been collaborating, offering consultation to different groups throughout the last year plus to develop these trauma-informed groups. So what do these groups look like? More details here. The Landing and Settling group program for refugees with a focus on recently resettled refugees in BC. This is a closed group, 6 sessions suggested. Brief strengths-based early interventions. We're not going to the trauma story. It's trauma-informed. We focus on group-based problem solving. It's a very interesting blend of stage 1 trauma treatment, remember? Safety and stabilization, containment, being here, with settlement support, settlement information, integration of services. That's key. So in order to integrate services, we need to have a clinical counselor and a settlement worker. And the groups have recently happened in first language, focus on a specific group, but they may happen in multiple languages, and we can have language corners. We at VAS have a group similar to this model for refugee claimants, and we definitely have language corners there, 7, 8 sometimes. There is a manual available for this landing and settling group, again, thanks to the efforts of our funders. And we put that together, a summary, a tentative summary. We know manuals and summaries are always incomplete, but a tentative and successful summary, I would say, of years of doing groups at last. And that manual has session handouts in Arabic. Don't let me forget to tell you how we have been adapting this content to groups for children. It's doable. So, what does a session look like? And when you have a manual, you can have access to the manual as well. You will make even more sense of this. So we have a settlement topic, so to say, agreed on. And one session may be about housing, barriers to housing, building home / finding housing in a new country. We build from the most concrete, specific settlement base to the most kind of experiential, unique to my experience aspect of it. So we can blend the settlement and the trauma work. So we have an opening circle, usually with a very kind of fun, active, body-based intervention, or maybe an arts-based intervention, keeping it simple and fun. And then we go into the topic of the day. We initiate a discussion. Collaboration, horizontal, is not only the facilitators delivering the content. We want to create that mutual witnessing frame. We acknowledge, being trauma-informed, that information has an impact, right? And people bring their own experiences and their struggles to absorb it. So we definitely contact that and acknowledge that, and we introduce a grounding technique to make sure that we are here. And we practice it. And again, we move around a lot. So all those techniques, all those skills meant to help clients will affect regulation, to help them be here. Once we make sure that we are still here, we continue exchanging information. So you see how that integration allows the settlement information to really land. Because I bet that you guys can relate to it. Oftentimes, you are trying to explain to the client, completing this form, going there, this is where I refer you, and somehow or other, the client doesn't get there. And it's not because you are not effective or because the client is no cooperative. It's that need to address the impact of trauma, right? And to blend and to integrate the services. So in group, that happens very smoothly. Back to content discussion, questions, exchange, clients supporting clients, and a closing activity. Again, to make sure that we are ready to go back to the world. So you see that we haven't talked about the stories. And not to make a taboo out of the stories, but there's so much work that we can all do in terms of supporting refugees to recover and to rebound and to make the most of a second chance in Canada. There's so much work that we can do without having to go into the story. That we need to be trauma-informed. That's definitely the case. Okay. So recapping from a different lens, elements of groups. We have, where shall I start? Information sharing, client to client, counselor or settlement worker, sharing with the group absorbing that and adding, collaboration, witnessing, empowerment, principles of trauma-informed care. There's psychoeducation share, skills building, cope and practice. The information sharing may include testimonials, previous refugees, or community workers, guest speakers, right? Coming to introduce clients to services or share an experience, creating more opportunities in that respect. For sure, this group is a container to build community. And again, for us, the workers, to keep our eyes open, to attend to the client's experience, not just listen to the content and the story, but attend how this individual is in relationships. How able is she, he, them, they to be in groups? Does that I observe warrant a referral? So groups are a great setting for us workers to assess that. Yeah? Perfect. So, there we go. Some lessons learned, or some confirmations. Healing does happen in community. And as I was saying at the beginning, because community is what refugees were first ripped off. That's what political violence and torture does. Isolation. So we need to establish that opportunity for reconnection. That witnessing piece that fosters empowerment. And again, a strength of groups. Groups can be challenging, and we all know that, but they're worth trying. So whenever you get that, oh no, these clients don't want groups, they don't, let us question that. Let us critically address that. Let us not take that statement at face value. Assessment for group readiness is key, definitely. Session content needs to be negotiated with clients each and every time. Does this make sense, folks? Or shall we be talking about this instead? It has happened with the groups that have been taking place, big time. We all know that. Integration of services contributes to stigma reduction. Covered already, I guess. We can talk more about that. Something that has become very apparent that we cannot emphasize enough at us is the need for workers to get ongoing training on trauma-informed practice. It's an indispensable piece of professional development. For us to become more trauma-informed in our interactions, in our agencies, for us to question our settings, how trauma-informed are our premises, how trauma-informed can we afford to be in our day-to-day work, ongoing conversations, and conversations that lead us to this spirit of solidarity that is indispensable. Again, recapping on Adrian's conversation about the potential for vicarious trauma, right, and the need for workers to access self-care, I want to really put the word out there. Oftentimes, self-care is introduced as this very individualistic construct, right? And if I'm strong enough, and if I do my yoga, and I drink lots of water, and I talk about it a little bit, I'm doing self-care. But integration of services, raising awareness about trauma-informed practice, and committing to that, and creating settings where people can supervise, not only in terms of case conceptualization, where people can build solidarity, and workers can have mutual witnessing. In the same way that we offer it to clients in groups, we need that to make us sustainable in this work. I believe that what gets to us as workers is not so much the content of the stories, as hurtful as it may be. There are also, and we know this, stories of survival, of resiliency, but it's more about the day-to-day struggles with our settings, with the limitations in our schedules, in our capacity that gets to us. So creating a community of solidarity and supervision framed in those terms, not just clinical, not just case debrief or conceptualization, as much as we need that, of course. So that's part of a lesson that we learn on an ongoing basis. And clients say, I think it's good to wrap it up with the words of clients, I couldn't speak, now I'm coming back to share my strength with others. It's empowerment. I feel more connected each time, hearing from people who've been through it, people in my shoes, gave me courage and hope. We are so different, but we are also similar. We are together. Togetherness. And that's powerful. So, I hope that you will remain curious. That would be mission accomplished for me. And I look forward to your questions. You have my contact information there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mariana. And also, you mentioned some different resources. That'll be something that AMSA will be sharing out with everyone following today's event.
Yeah, the Best Vulnerability Assessment Tool and the group manual, definitely. And we want to thank our funders for that allow us to put that together. Yeah.
Yeah, so we do have a couple minutes time if there's any questions for Mariana. Tracy will be going around with the mic. Oh, there's already a question.
Thank you. I guess I'm kind of curious. I know I come from an agency where we actually do have some clinicians on staff because we have contracts with M50 and Fraser Health, but I don't know. I think we're at a bit of a unique situation. I don't know that most settlement agencies have that. So I'm kind of curious, right? I mean, I think we are running a stage 1 trauma group funded through United Way, but I just feel like, I'd be curious to know from people in the room in terms of capacity to do some of this. I mean, a stage 1 trauma group still requires a clinical counselor. I think when Adrian, you were talking about supervision, I wanted to clarify, I think you meant clinical supervision, some level of somebody providing supervision to settlement workers who have some clinical background, not necessarily a program manager providing an opportunity for people to debrief some of the stories that they're hearing from clients. So, yeah, I mean, I kind of, I'm familiar with some of this, and not to say that we're doing it all because the capacity just doesn't exist. But I'm curious how it's landing for most settlement agencies in the province, really, even in the Lower Mainland included.
So I think it's a question to all of us.
Yeah, so we contract with an Arabic-speaking counselor to provide that.
We have, for a couple of years now, have IRCC-funded settlement crisis support workers, settlement workers. But they have, and they're not doing clinical counseling, but they have master's level qualifications, or counseling qualifications. We are also about to launch a new 2-year pilot through private funding to provide up to 6 sessions with a registered clinical counselor for government-assisted refugee to seek professional clinical counseling. And prepay for that, because this is one of the questions, I guess this is another question, is I know VAST is supported by the UN as well as the provincial government, but it's how do you get the funding within the mental health system, because the intern federal health will only cover for a psychiatrist or a registered psychologist.
Non-community-based work,
but
right?
not community-based work.
Absolutely. Yeah, and considering, or actually assuming on their part, that people will access counseling within the first 12 months, and there will be time. The readiness will be there. We know that that's not necessarily the case. And by the time they entertain the possibility, we will still have time to process the referral, the physician prescribed referral, and it doesn't happen, we know. Not to mention the fact that it's very, if at all possible for us IRCCs to become service providers. That's a huge other conversation. But even if we get to the point where we can make good use of that IFH money, does that do the trick? I mean, 10 sessions, hopefully clients will complete them, but what about the community-based work, right? That ongoing network of support. Absolutely, the picture is incomplete. I don't know if anyone in the room wants to add.
Just a quick question. Does interim federal health cover group therapy, group work, or is it just the one-on-one?
It's a one-on-one.
Okay. Just
Yeah.
interesting given what you've just shared
No,
about
the model,
that.
the model is for the client to go see the clinician. So it's quite a model.
Just I have a question. Mariana, you already mentioned that, I mean, resources are very limited, but seeing this situation that is very much needed in the sector, is there any possibility to develop further partnerships and ensure that settlement workers also are ready to have this type of group that help refugees and people who have suffered trauma to go through the community-based support in a more successful way?
You know, Marcela, that's what I was talking about when I said my purpose for today is to instill curiosity and to maybe start having more and more conversations. We have been having these conversations, but more conversations about that, how to join forces, so that we can really pass on the message that trauma recovery, right, and mental health services do not have to look like just one-on-one counseling in a room. Not to exclude that. That is still needed, big time. But if we could partner with settlement agencies, as we've been doing it with many, but more so to integrate services and introduce trauma-informed groups, these stages of the trauma recovery are accomplished. And on top of that, people can for sure achieve resettlement goals if they get this support. So it's the best of two worlds. Makes sense, yeah.
I just want to really ensure that all of us are really clear that we have the best intentions to provide services, connections in the community, in the neighborhood houses. That is our main focus, to build capacity and to connect people. But when we don't have the right tools, we are going just around the circle. And then, for example, just the wave of refugees that are attending programming right now, they're there, but they're not, because they still dealing with the mental health issue that they bring. They haven't accessed yet the proper supports to move into that area. But if we could build the capacity in the communities, I think we can all move forward faster to support them, but also support the sector. The settlement workers are overworked in so many areas, and hearing all those stories, it's always a kind of a way of feeling sometimes disengaged or tiredness.
Yeah, we have all these settlement goals that we want to help clients with, but we cannot assume that they are here mentally, emotionally, physically even. So that's where the integration of services becomes crucial. I don't want to forget to mention what I said about groups for children. And I want to say that this model can be absolutely applicable to children, of course edited by a trauma-informed group. So we don't take these little guys into the story necessarily, but we are very aware of the trauma in the work that we do. And we use body-based interventions, play therapy, expressive arts. There may be a topic discussed that they bring up, and an activity, and all that. So come talk to us, to me, to us. We have been, I have been providing consultation to lots of folks in the Lower Mainland about how to work with kids at different settings, schools, community centers, from a trauma-informed lens. So even to assess and screen those that need more specific trauma-focused assistance. So just keep in mind and let us talk about it, let us share experience and knowledge.
Okay, I think we just have a few minutes left, so questions for both panelists are welcome to. I was going to say,
back there.
so it's Can either of you tell us a little bit about the trauma-informed practice training? Where is it available? How long is it? What does it cost? Any information?
That's a question for me, I assume. Or
It
for
doesn't matter.
both?
I'm not sure
Okay,
anybody.
because you look at me. Okay, let us share. We have developed of the year lots of training curricula. From my current position, Provincial Refugee Mental Health Coordinator, I've been doing that a lot, delivering training sessions to groups, agencies in the province. Our trauma-informed practice curricula is ever evolving. Yeah, we, over the last year, have managed to solidify that more thanks to my position and this stream of funding that we got. But it's been challenging, right? Many times we've done it, I mean, based on volunteer hours and stuff. We tailor, sorry, I may have missed that piece of the question. It can range from a 3-hour session to a whole day. Very hands-on scenario, so some very clear discussion about trauma, what we're talking about, but then really hands-on, experiential approach to scenarios. Yeah. I know that you guys have done great work in that respect, so, and with Karina, we had conversations, so collaboration, yeah. Always welcome. Yeah. Look forward to talk more about that.
Just to add a little bit to this collaborative approach, which is really so important. One of the things we did in Jordan is physiotherapists and clinicians were working together in having these groups, and it was amazingly successful because many of the people were really struggling with body images and all kinds of aches and pains. So the physiotherapists and clinicians together were able to work out exercises that we started the groups with or in the middle of the group. And this was especially effective for children and adolescents because children can't sit too long. So a lot of expressive work and physiotherapy and looking at the everyday issues was very, very powerful. And also people had a lot of fun in these groups. It wasn't a somber group, really. They bought food, they shared food, they made friends. And so it has a lot of advantages to have, how do you call it? Your first trauma-informed group. I liked the name. That
Landing and settling.
Landed and settling,
Yeah,
yes.
assuming that because of refugees have arrived in Canada,
Yes.
it doesn't imply that they have landed, let alone that they have settled in their bodies, in their minds, in their hearts. So we need to create opportunities for that to happen. And in order to do that, we need to work on the housing and on the building home. And that's where sentiment and mental health come together, definitely. And modalities that help that, trauma, body-based modalities, play, expressive arts, and also they are so cross-cultural sensitive. And mindfulness-based modalities, and they're evidence-based. So let us be clear about that. So yeah, I look forward to more conversations about that during the break or from now on. When it comes to the trainings, we offer them. Even when my current position is coming to an end, we'll continue to offer them on the BAS 10, and we can collaborate and trauma-informed practice with conversations that we need to keep having.
So thank you so much, Adrian. Thank you so much, Mariana. Thank you so much for all of your questions. Unfortunately, we are out of time for today's session, and we will be reconvening the larger group meeting here in about 2 minutes. So thank you so much.
So,